Hello, everyone. We are now investigating feminism, basically. The theme of feminism will pop up in a number of our readings, a number of our authors. But this text by Simone de Beauvoir is, well, I was going to say it's devoted to the general topic of feminism, but actually it sort of gave birth to most contemporary feminism. Not all, but a lot of it. So just a little quick history lesson, and this will give you a little context too for why Beauvoir is important. Sometimes people will break up the history of feminism into three different waves or three different sort of eras, right? The first era is women getting the vote. So that's the suffragist movement, basically. And that's about legal equality, right? As hard as it is to believe, in the United States, the Constitution was written, it only applied to guys. It only applied to white guys. And people over a certain age, right? So there's a whole bunch of people excluded by definition. And it wasn't just here. Women in lots of countries couldn't vote until about 100 years ago, give or take. Like, that's wild, right? It seems so obvious to us now that, yeah, women should be able to vote. Black people too. Yeah, everybody should be able to vote. But it just wasn't before. So that's what's usually called first wave feminism, is that fight for the right to vote. And certain other legal equalities, like women had to fight most places for the right to own property. Once more, how crazy is that if a father died and left his sole child, his daughter, his property, when that daughter married someone, then the man now owns her property. Right? She didn't have the right to own property in lots of places. So that's first wave feminism, and that's really important, but that's not what Beauvoir is talking about. So what's called usually second wave feminism, it was basically caused almost solely by Simone de Beauvoir, who we're reading now. And what second wave feminism says is legal equality is important, but it's only half the story. So, for instance, you can have legal equality, the right to vote, and still your parents might treat your brother better than they treat you. Or they might say, well, we'll pay for your brother to go to college, but we're not paying for you to go to college, daughter, because you just need to find a nice guy and marry him. You don't have to work, so you don't have to go to college. Now, that wouldn't infringe on your legal rights in any way. It doesn't deny you citizenship. Your parents aren't saying, they'll kill you if you go to college. They're just saying, we're not going to pay for it because we don't think it's important. We think it's important that your brother go to college and get a good job. Now, half of our class is women, so that's not happening to people, right? My point is just to show you that legal equality is one thing. There's still this whole other social realm, we might say, and that's what Beauvoir is going to call concrete freedom. Right? You can have the legal opportunity to go to college as a woman, but if your parents don't want to pay for it because they think it's a waste, or if your boyfriend thinks it's funny that you want to be an engineer because girls just don't do that, et cetera, et cetera. That's the stuff that Beauvoir is interested in talking about. Okay. There's also something called third wave feminism, which is more recent. And you and I can talk about that, but since it's not Beauvoir and it's not anyone else we're reading in this class, we'll just leave that aside. So that's a little history lesson. The context is this. Beauvoir wants to talk about what she thinks is genuine, real freedom. That's going to go way beyond legal equality. So what she's going to be talking about are basically stereotypes we have in our society about women and men. And what she'll point out is that at one level, what other people think about you doesn't matter, right? If your parents think you're stupid and you're smart, at one level, it doesn't matter what they think. You'll get A's on your math homework. On the other hand, of course, it matters a lot what other people think of you. So if your parents think you're not smart and they discourage you from going to college, or your parents think that you're lazy, and so they don't, hire you on at their business, other people's expectations can have a big effect on you. Part of what Beauvoir wants to say is that we, men and women both, so this is important, men and women both think this, we expect less out of women than we do out of men. And people tend to live up to your expectations, but they also live down to your expectations. Do you know what I mean? So we all, women and men, expect a little bit less out of women. And so women are encouraged to do a little bit less than men. They're encouraged to go into some fields and not others. And of course, everyone's free to make their own decision in the face of others' expectations and stereotypes. But it's sure easier, and it sure happens more often, that we sort of get nudged by other people's expectations into certain ways of life. Now, I know as young Americans, you're probably thinking, men and women both, not me, right? Not me. But just think about this in terms of, say, clothing or makeup. So you think that you don't listen to other people's expectations, you don't care what other people think, and you just do you, right? Okay, well, if you're a girl, do you wear makeup? I mean, we could even make it very pointed. Are you wearing makeup right now? And I don't know what the numbers would be, but I'm sure most of the women in my class wear makeup some of the time, and I suppose the majority, would be my guess, are wearing makeup at this very minute. Now, if you're a guy, do you wear makeup? Are you wearing makeup right now? Now, if it were just that we all did our own thing, we're all individuals and other people's expectations don't matter one bit to us, then why wouldn't guys wear makeup? Now, I don't think on this issue you can point to something like biology. Trust me, there is no biological gene or markers of genetic material that causes women to wear makeup. You know what I mean? We didn't evolve with makeup, right? So if women wear makeup now, it's not going to be, it's not dictated to us by biology. That's just social expectations. You've got guys who'll spend $50 on a haircut, but won't spend 1 cent on, eyeliner or something to make themselves look better. This is just, this is just an example I'm making up at random. Perhaps it's not the strongest example. Okay? My point is this, though, is that family encouragement, societal messages, what you think about yourself, all these things mix together and help us make the decisions we make. So while nobody's forcing women to go into, say, human resources, and no one's forcing women to go into marketing, if a girl and a young woman her whole life has been told that numbers are something that, other people are better at, and when she puts on makeup and things like that, people respond to her with a smile, then yes, she might be more likely to go into marketing or human resources, right? Because she's good working with people, because people respond to her in a certain way her whole life. That's all, right? Beauvoir's not dumb. She's not saying it's stimulus response, that one time someone says girls aren't good at sports and you never pick up a basketball again or anything like that, right? The way I like to think of it is, this expression, it's a death by 1,000 tiny cuts, right? That's how I view what Beauvoir is saying. Her book, it's about an 800-page book, is filled with examples of various sorts. And what she points out is that the consistent message we get about women in our culture and other cultures is that, yes, of course, women are free and equal. Yes, of course. But, ... We go, yes, yes, women are just as smart as men. Everyone knows that. Come on. What is this? Like the 50s? Everyone knows that. But it makes sense that more famous men or more famous scientists are men than women. Yes, of course, women are responsible and know things and make their way in the world just like men do. Come on. This isn't like the 1200s or something. But women can be a little ditzy, and when women are on their period, they don't think so clearly, da 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 da. So that's what Beauvoir says, is she points out, there's a whole bunch of examples, but she says, we do this with women. We sort of give with one hand and take away with the other. We say, yes, of course, women are free and equal, and they should be. And we mean it. But then what we do is 1,000 tiny little cuts, right? We water down that freedom a little bit. We ask her, we don't usually restrict women's freedom ourselves, but we ask her to restrict her own freedom. Just a little bit. But a little bit we ask her to do, every day, it adds up. Okay? Just so you know, you can apply this same analysis to racial relations as well. There's certain races that have stereotypes that are what Beauvoir would call limiting to the freedom of those groups. You say the group's just as smart, just as hardworking, everyone's free and equal. Then there's a pause and a but, and you go, well, I don't want to sound racist, or I'm no racist, but, and then you start saying things about that group that show that we as a culture expect them to do a little bit less. Right? We expect them to restrict their own freedom. We're not going to chain anybody up. We're not going to fire anyone for being a minority, right, or being a different race than us. But we just expect, why is that group in poverty? Because they're not as smart, or they don't work as hard. So that's what I mean when I say we give freedom and equality to everyone with one hand, and then we take little bits back away from people with the other hand. So, I will now, before getting into Beauvoir a little bit, talk about that other article we read, Jelinek, and I want to talk about it now because I like using these little news stories like this, but because, I like the philosophy so much, sometimes when I get going on Beauvoir, I'll end up forgetting to say much about the other article, so let's avoid that problem. Let's talk about Jelinek right now. There are slightly more recent stories about the exact same topic, so feel free to Google that and sort of update your knowledge base if you like. But the main point of the Jelinek news story and more recent news stories around the topic are this. Jobs in general are more and more open to women today. Of course, most jobs are legally open to women to the same extent that they're open to men. But the military, until recently, there were plenty of positions, combat positions, that women were not allowed to sign up for. Women are allowed to be in the military and have been for many decades. But frontline combat positions, women were not allowed to sign up for until recently. Now, we got to recognize this is a real live issue. Because at one level, as an American, I want to say let anybody sign up for any of those jobs. If they can do the work, of course, let them do it. And I don't know what they can do or not do in advance, so let the women try. Let them try to be Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, elite members, all this stuff. On the other hand, that women would not be able to do all the physical things that men can do is not surprising to me. Right? So this is something, I'll just name this problem right now, but we'll come back to it. It's the question of biology. Right? Maybe culturally, men don't wear makeup and women do in America, but maybe there's nothing biological to that. But that men tend to be bigger and stronger than women, that's not really cultural, right? That's primarily natural or biological. It's this old nature versus nurture question that we keep coming up against. Okay? So part of me wants to say, hey man, women are just as blank as men are, just as strong, just as smart, whatever. Let them try out for all the jobs. On the other hand, especially because there's lives at stake here, but even just at another level, like, well, I don't think most women can be Navy SEALs. Sorry, maybe this sounds sexist or whatever, but, you know, I can't play basketball well because I'm not very tall. You know, them's the breaks. Okay, so just so you know, the update of this story is that the piece I gave you is that they were trying out like a pilot program, an initial program, to see what sort of physical testing requirements were more modern and more applicable to various combat positions. And one of the things they tried was having women's physical standards would be lower than that of men. So that a woman would have to do, say, 5 pull-ups to qualify for a program, whereas a man for the same program would have to do something like 10. Now, that was just one way that they tried it out. That's not the only way they do it. So if that sounds bad to you, just know that the military tried other options, including same standards for males and females for the same position. Okay, so this is not the only way the military is approaching this problem. Okay, the final update is now officially all combat positions in the U.S. military, and we're talking Coast Guard, Marines, everything, are officially open to women. The government said if you can make an argument for any specific job, like say Navy SEALs, why it should never be open to women, the military was allowed to make those arguments. And it turns out that none of them put forward compelling arguments for why certain jobs, gunnery, tank specialist, all this stuff, why any of them should be off limits to women. So now all jobs are officially open to application. You can apply for them in the military, whether you're male or female. Okay. So here's the thing. This both fits with this news article, it fits with what Beauvoir is saying, and it also sort of undermines or challenges what she says too. Because partly it fits with what she's saying. We say, yes, women are equal to men, of course. And then we say, oh, well, but not for like physical stuff. Not for sports, not for combat, not for moving. Like if you're going to call your friends to help you move, you're going to call all females or all guys. Right? Like who do you want you to walk you home at night through a bad neighborhood? A guy or a girl? So this is what I'm saying, is this fits perfectly with Beauvoir. We say everybody's equal. But women aren't equal when it comes to physical stature. They're not as strong, all that. On the other hand, it seems like it sort of undercuts or disputes what Beauvoir is saying. Because her basic point, she says, hey, we're all born human. That means we're all free to choose whatever we want to do. So we're all the same. But then this shows, well, there's women who had military training. They'd been through boot camp and everything. And they still couldn't do anywhere near the amount of physical activity that men could. And this isn't us trying to be insulting towards women, but when you're talking about military life, you have to huff backpacks through rugged terrain. You have to be able to pick up someone who's your same size or bigger, if it's a man versus a woman, and drag them out of enemy fire. You might have to carry them, if their bones are broken, on your shoulder for a quarter mile. And if someone can't do that, then they're not fit for military service. Now, that's true of anyone. If you're a man and you can't do that, you're not fit for military service. The point is that in general, there might be outliers, but in general, women can't do the, say, 12 pull-ups required. Even when they get training, it's really hard for any of them to meet that threshold. So then it seems like, well, Beauvoir, don't kill the messenger, right? I'm not sexist or, discriminatory or stereotyping. It's that we let the women try and their bodies can't do what men's bodies can do. So just at that level, we'll pause the recording now and tell me what you think. Reading that news article by Jelinek with the Beauvoir, what do we think so far? And I want to keep this one wide open because I'm sure you have lots of interesting things to say that would go in totally different directions. So just on the issue of women in the military, these two are the article with the section from Beauvoir that we read. What do you think? How do you evaluate that kind of issue? Okay. So make sure you pause the recording and think about this for yourself, because I'm going to follow up with some things now. But I want your own thoughts to be on their own first. Okay. So here are a few things that Beauvoir says, and a lot of these points are scattered throughout the introduction that we read, which is pages 3 through about 17. Okay, 3 through 17. One of them she'll say is this: it's not accurate to look at something like this and then start talking about women and men in general. Now I know it seems like it, right? But here's the thing. For you dudes in the class, the requirements listed in the article, can you do those requirements right now? I'll just say I'm not sure that I could. let's just put it that way. Okay? I'm not sure that I could. So one of the things that Beauvoir points out on page 13 is she says there is this guy and he's sort of a snooty French writer. Beauvoir's French, by the way. And there's this guy and he was a snooty French writer, and he says, look, even when there's a woman who seems like she's a genius, all she's doing is repeating the genius ideas of some guy who came before her. And he lists off all the famous people: Jesus, Marx, He lists off all these famous philosophers. And she says, yes, but that guy who was talking was no Aristotle, was no philosopher of any real stature. Same thing, to say that women can't do certain things physically that men can, like the Marines tryouts. I, as a man, can also not do those things. So another way to put this is, I ain't Einstein, right? So even if it's factually true, which it does seem to be, that men win the vast majority of Nobel Prizes in science, right? What often happens is men will say men are better at science, even though they themselves are not any good at science. I'm pretty good, I'd like to think, at philosophy. I don't know anything about relativity and space-time and all that stuff. So you see, you want to make sure you don't clothe yourself with the victories of other people and then claim that that says something about you versus women in this case. So that's one of the ways Beauvoir would respond. She'd say, it's not men who are better at philosophy than women. It's that there's a few famous men in the canon of philosophy and very few women, but that doesn't say anything about like the average Joe on the street, right? He's probably not good at being a Marine or being a philosopher. Same for women, right? So that's one way she would respond. Another way she would respond is say, okay, she is going to believe the statistics. This number of women can only do this low number of pull-ups. She's going to believe the statistics. But what she's going to say is, we never just see these things purely naturally. We always interpret these things through a certain sort of lens. So on page 8, she says, nature's no more of an unchangeable fact, an immutable given, than is historical reality. Part of what she means here is this. Women can only do so many pull-ups relative to men. That's, okay, those are the facts. But what happens is we don't just see those raw as facts. We always try to give an interpretation of why, right? We always try to give an interpretation of why. So what we'll often say for something is like, well, but men are built to be stronger. That's nature. Okay, and why is that? We say, well, hunter-gatherer stuff, right? Men back in the cavemen days used to go and kill animals. That's why we have big, strong pectoral muscles, because that's how we would sort of stab or attack the animals. Women would stay in the cave and make clothing, protect the children, that sort of stuff. So we say, it's just biological. Men are built to have muscle because they went out and attacked animals, right? Okay. So a few things. One, the science of that is a little bit dodgy. A lot of what human beings did to get food back in the day was not hunt saber-toothed tigers, right? Which were, I'm pretty sure, extinct before human beings showed up. But hunter-gatherer, you'd go and pick berries, right? You don't need big pecs for that, okay? But leaving aside the factual basis, what Beauvoir is going to say is but look at the way we spin that in the interpretation. We say by nature, by the kinds of bodies that men and women have, men's bodies allow them to do things. That is, men's bodies are a natural extension of their freedom. That's how they make their freedom happen. Women's bodies, on the other hand, are literally weak. Women's bodies limit their freedom. So let's go back to let's pause there and just think about it for a second. What she's going to say is when we say that men are a certain way and women are another way, we're not just describing neutral differences. Somehow, magically, almost all of our descriptions line up that what men are naturally is power, freedom, ability. And what women's bodies naturally are is reduced power or weakness, inability, limitations. So I'll ask you another question in a second that might back that up. But before I do that, I want to go to an example I already gave and talk about that. So remember before I said I think we all agree in the abstract and in the legal sense that women should be equal and free. We say, yeah, women are just as smart as men. And then we go, pause, but when women are on their period, they're really irrational. Remember, this isn't me talking, but it's also not me, right? Because even if you don't like the sound of that idea, you probably said that idea before, thought that idea before, and we're talking to men and women both here, right? Plenty of women will describe their own behavior as I wasn't in control, I was being emotional because of my period. So please note, Beauvoir is not blaming men for the plight of women. She's saying, in our culture and in lots of cultures, men and women both expect a little less out of women. And so then women, in their freedom, because women choose to do what they do, ask a little bit less out of themselves. Okay, they don't live up to the full potential of their freedom. So that's a problem for all of us, right? That's not a problem that men put on women. That's a problem for all of us. Okay, sorry if I keep interrupting myself. We all say that women are just as smart and capable as men, but then a lot of us, maybe basically all of us, also say something that seems to be the opposite of that. Well, women, at least 3 to 5 days out of every 28, at least between the ages of, say, 12 and when's menopause, 40, 45, something like that. So at least for 3 decades, at least for about 10% of her days, woman is not as smart. She's irrational. She's not as rational. She's more emotional. And she's not in control of her body, but rather her body is in control of her. Same thing, we say, well, yeah, most people want kids, but women have a biological clock. And when it begins to tick, they get baby fever on the brain, and then their lives are built around trying to get a man so that they can have a child. Same thing, that doesn't sound very good, but you very likely have thought that or said that before. Okay. So Beauvoir says, where's the corresponding thing on the guy's side? There isn't one, right? So we describe women through their bodies, and we describe their bodies as things that control them, rather than as, tools to make their dreams and aspirations happen. So Beauvoir says on page 5, She says, woman is defined as ovaries and a uterus. Such are said to be the particular conditions that lock her unfreely in her subjectivity. Some even say she thinks with her hormones. However, this is her point, men vainly forget that their anatomy also includes hormones and testicles instead of ovaries. So a man thinks of his body as a direct and normal link with the world, whereas he considers woman's body an obstacle to her freedom, a prison, and burdened by what makes it particular. So the way I like to put it is this. We say that women have a biological clock, and they're obsessed with having babies, at least once they hit, 25, 30, something like that, if they haven't had them yet. Okay, it does take two to tango, though, correct? Okay, so men also want to have children. In fact, if we were in class right now, I'd ask you all to raise your hands. Raise your hand if you want to have kids someday. There's only ever one or two holdouts in the whole class, and they're no more likely to be men than women. So basically, almost everyone wants to have kids. So when men want to have kids, we don't say that it's their testicles pushing them to reproduce the species. We don't say they have a biological clock. But why not? They're equally driven by biology to want to reproduce. And if a guy has a boy, he might name the boy after himself as proof, right, that he is free and can generate things in the world. But we never have daughters named after their mothers, do we? That's sort of a side point, but, why is that? So, well, let's put it this way, too. 3, 4, 5 days out of the month, a woman's on her period, and yeah, there's hormones in her, and yeah, those hormones do disrupt her life. Beauvoir is not denying that biology has a real effect on us. But men's bodies produce different proportions of hormones. So, men have estrogen in their bodies and women have testosterone in their bodies. It's just men tend to have a lot more testosterone than women do. But guys, ask yourself, or women ask yourselves about the men in your lives, have you ever seen a man do something foolish because he was trying to have sex with a woman? You ever seen a man act a little crazy because some other dude was looking at his girl? You ever seen a guy, or been a guy, who lost his temper? Yeah, of course. So, hormones do have an effect on all people. But men, not 3 to 5 days out of every 28, but 28 days out of every 28, have whole loads of testosterone coursing through their bodies. Now, you've heard of roid rage, right? Steroids will make people flip out and lose their temper. Steroids are nothing but precursors to testosterone. So basically, you take steroids, your body converts them to testosterone. If you increase your testosterone levels through steroids, you're more likely to be angry. That is, you're more likely to lose control of yourself because of your body and your hormones. But this is the thing, is normal guys who aren't on steroids are already chock full of testosterone. They're more likely to get into fights. So if you've ever seen a fight at a bar or a party, was it a guy or a girl? I'd say about 7 out of 10, 9 out of 10 of the ones I've seen have been guys in fights at parties. But we would never, you see, that's what I'm talking about. It's the interpretation. We would just never think of men being out of control, devoted to perpetuating the species. We say, no, he's a player. We say, well, he might be, don't trust him around your girl, right? Like he's Mr. Go steal your girl or whatever, right? But you go, well, that's him freely choosing to do that. He likes sex as an individual. But if a woman has any sort of relationship to something like that, we say it's not her who's deciding. It's the biological clock. She's being controlled by her body, whereas we think of him as using his body to do what he wants. Now, biologically, both of us are caught up in our hormones. But we always find a way to spin it where women's bodies limit them, and men's bodies are either neutral or powerful tools to do what they want. Same thing. We could spin all this stuff. Men are stronger, but women live longer. Okay, so who's actually more powerful? We could spin it this way too. What kind of job do you want to have today? Like when you leave college, what kind of job do you want to have? Well, unless your goal is to be a construction worker or a Marine or, I don't know, a professional boxer or something like that, then whatever biology your body has, male or female, doesn't really impact the job that you're going to have. If you want to go into business, having giant pecs will not help you with that. If you want to go into science, being able to do 21 pull-ups is not going to help you with that. So, in the world we actually live in today, the biological differences which are real don't make much of a difference for most of us. I'm assuming that most people in my class are not Marines, for instance. Some of you may well be, and thanks for your service, if so, but the majority of you aren't. So see, the pull-up thing doesn't affect your freedom at all. But what happens is every time we see a news story, like the Marines thing, we point to it and we say, see, women in general can't do the kinds of things that men can do in general. Men are different, better frankly, than women in general. But that's actually that's not the only interpretation to put on that. Unless your hopes and dreams for your life involve doing a lot of pull-ups or being a Marine, then that doesn't apply to you generally. It only applies to people training to be Marines. So, that's, we're just dipping our toe into this. We're barely reading anything past the introduction. But that's part of how Beauvoir would respond to these sort of things. She's not going to deny that there's bodily differences. She just thinks what we consistently do is we interpret those. We sort of make a choice, but an unconscious choice, to interpret those things as if they say what woman is in general. Not just that women don't do as many pull-ups, but that women in general are weaker than men. And we always find a way to spin it so that women's bodies are limitations, whereas men's bodies are like freedom factories. All right, so now I want to ask you a question, and then we'll end the recording, and I'll add a little bit more in another recording. Okay? So the question I wanted to ask before, coming back to it now, is what do you think are the significant differences between men and women? What differences, if any, do you think are significant between men and women? Okay? And then what are the effects of those differences? So how are men and women different? And we want to say significant ways, not that men's ears tend to be larger than women's ears. It's probably not it's probably not important. Okay? And then what are the effects of that? Like, how does that mean we should or do live our lives differently? And we'll have that in the discussion board, and I'm sure we'll have an interesting discussion around that. So the recording will end now. Take this time to think about that question, and then I'll have another short recording after this where I just fill in the last few missing points. Okay, thank you, everyone.